Welcome, everyone, to a new podcast produced by Tonique. This is Tonique's weekly politics refresh. I'm one of your three hosts today. My name is Matthew Spurrier. I'm an international politics writer for the politics section at Tonique magazine. Joining us today, we have two of our great writers who are going to be joining me weekly. And we're going to talk about the daily news around the United States and also around the world. Joining me first is Ruth. Ruth, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, thank you. So yeah, I'm one of the three hosts as well. I'm sitting across the world from the other two. I'm in Germany right now. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and to talk about all the stuff that's going on in the world. So yeah, I'm really excited.
We're super
And
excited.
so yeah. I'm giving the word to Robert.
Hi, I'm Robert. I'm a political correspondent with Tonique as well. I am a 2020 class graduate of Northwestern University. I study political science, and that explains why I am interested in politics. I'm looking forward to discussing domestic and foreign issues with the two of you as well. And with that, we're just going to jump right into our first domestic issue, which is the stimulus bill currently that had just passed the Senate with some minor alterations tailored to more moderate Democrats. And we're going to talk about what's in it and whether or not we think it's going to pass the House. All right, so just a brief overview of what it contains. This is from the Washington Post. The relief measure includes a new round of up to $1,400 stimulus checks for millions of Americans, $350 billion for cash-strapped cities and states, $130 billion for schools, and other sizable sums for a wide array of programs. Personally, I think that the economic stimulus package that's passed, whatever form it takes through our debate, is necessary to get us and our economy and our citizens in a more secure place on the back end of COVID. But I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, typically I'm sure I'll be the resident libertarian right winger on this podcast, but the truth of the matter is, during a global pandemic, the fact that it's taken this long to get relief in the hands and such little relief, to be honest with you. I mean, over here in the United States, it's been a total of what, like at the end of the day, it's going to be around $3,000 for a year of having businesses shut down, people losing their jobs, record high unemployment, and hundreds of thousands of Americans losing their loved ones. Um, the fact that they sort of sneakily decided to put in the $1,400 stimulus package, and it really is peanuts compared to this bill that they're passing. And even so, it narrowly passed the House with some stipulations. And so I'd be wondering what you guys think about sort of, the denial of $15 minimum wage. I'm sure that's probably something that you guys were looking forward to. I know a lot of people, especially on Twitter, were really upset, but $300 per week in unemployment payments until early September. I mean, is this stimulus package going to be enough to get us out of the hole we're in?
Yeah, I think it's hard to say because like there are these economical issues you have to face during a pandemic. And for what I can say, what I saw in Germany is that the people who lost their job, the people who struggled the most, they also struggled the most with accepting the rules and following the politicians. So
Mm.
it's not only giving financial aid, but also like how to lead the country during such a like bad crisis. And yeah, for me, like the $15 per hour, is it? Yeah, right.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, the basic like right you have to get the money you deserve you work for. So I think it should be. That's the least they can do. But
um, so I think this plan will be very effective in some ways and leave a lot of people behind in others. The U.S. economy is already slated and projected to return to its pre-COVID state by the middle to mid-fall of 2021, which is great. Um, I do think, however, that like '08, like the financial crisis of '08, we will see people who had productive jobs either leave the labor market entirely, which will, that will affect our unemployment numbers in a way that makes it look like it's positive, but it's actually leaving people behind. And I think that, this form, it's Keynesian economics at its best, is good for the general economy, but it forgets about people at the bottom. In terms of minimum wage, I mean, if you look at what it should be adjusted for inflation and price growth, it should be $24, right? If you just kept it steady with what was going on in the economy at whole. But I don't know if this was necessarily the place to pass that. Even though it's got broad support with Americans, it clearly does not have broad support with senators. But that is its own huge issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Just in general, I really dislike like trying to shoehorn separate issues that should have their own bills. Maybe, you know, if you want to pass a $15 minimum wage, obviously you need broad support from the Senate, right? Obviously, but to sort of tack it onto this bill that is really important, right? Like to sort of like hold up negotiations to sort of get these issues in now, it just sort of left a bad taste in my mouth. I think right now the United States needs to just get money in the hands of people and needs to get money in the hands of small businesses. And it really failed to with the stimulus bill that passed, during the Trump administration. Um, it was one time. I mean, they held up passing the bill because he wanted to put his name on it. Like these were the priorities that they were halting us from passing it the first time. And so I'm sure they'll try again. I mean, the Biden administration, they have the Senate narrowly, of course, right? I mean, I know they're trying to get rid of the filibuster. Um, they'll have their opportunity to pass that bill, I'm sure. So I think right now, get it through. And we have here, what are the odds of it passing the House? I think it's got to pass, right? I mean,
I think
is everyone expecting
100%.
it to
I
fail?
think they're at like 99, 100%, something in that ballpark. There's almost no way that, a lesser version of the bill, which is essentially going back, is going to have less support from, like the Democrats that defected and didn't vote for it, or the Republicans, that are almost on that edge of being able to vote for it, but they were saying it's too expensive. It's going to balloon the deficit, which are ridiculous arguments, but that's what they do.
I actually don't mind the argument about the deficit. It's coming from a place where they have no standing, right?
Right. That's what I mean. It's like if you approved the tax bill that expanded our deficit because it followed Reaganomics, which is proven not to work now. If you cut taxes on the 1% and then turn around and say, no, we can't help everyone else because the deficit's too large. I don't know.
There are some people that they're the Thomas Masseys who are they believe in not passing bills, and hey, I mean that's their stance. They're principled, but it is funny, obviously, to see certain senators who were totally okay with increasing spending, passing all of these spending bills during a Republican administration, to then go, whoa, guys, come on, we really gotta watch this budget here. We're blowing it out. I mean, come on, we can't be spending money like crazy. I mean, it's just the height of hypocrisy, really, and it doesn't surprise me, but it just really is funny to watch it happen in real time.
Yeah, I mean, always the part where you have to, look at the argument and look at who said what and when. Like you said, Matt, it's when it's a Republican era, then people who are Republican are for that stimulus bill or for a certain part. And so I think a big question also the voters have to ask themselves, like, how is party even, how can you trust the politicians that they do the right thing, even though it's like someone from the Democrats who like explained the bill, or the other way around. So I think that's one of the like most important things that, for example, we or me, I see as a non-US citizen, like how can it be all the politics, and especially such important bills who have to pass for people? I mean, even though it's like there should be more money, there should be more help for people who really suffer, and also schools and everything around it, but still I ask myself, how can it be like that? It's still about the politics, about the people, and not about the subject itself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
So
it's just it speaks to how polarized as a nation we've really become when
yeah,
70% of Americans, 4 out of 10 Trump supporters, support this stimulus package. And yet you have every Republican consistently voting against it, having people force the bill to be read out loud in its entirety and scoring political points that way. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's plain and
yeah,
simple.
One
yeah,
interesting point I want to say is that what really illuminated some of the yeah, there's an old saying that Washington D.C. This is Hollywood for ugly people.
Yeah.
That's a saying because Representative Justin Amash was on a podcast that I was listening to recently, and the reason that he was isolated and sort of thrown to the side so many times is because he made the point that these people are given by their committees sort of talking points that they want them to say on television, and that a lot of senators and House representatives treat it as a television show. And so they're yelling and they're screaming at each other, but as soon as the cameras go off, they walk over to each other, how you doing, how's your kids, and they're friends, which I'm not opposed to civility in politics, but to sort of get the people polarized when you yourself are really like, this is just a game, we're hanging out, is really, it's sinister. I mean, it's pretty evil. And one thing you are seeing also, I want to say, is you're starting to see Republicans get away from Reaganomics and libertarian economics with people like Josh Halsey, who are populist right wing figures who are just saying, frankly, we don't care about the economics anymore. We don't care about cutting spending anymore. Um, they're, the party of Reagan is dead, quite frankly.
So yes, the party of Reagan is certainly dead. Trump absolutely was either the final nail or the entire coffin. But I wouldn't say that conservative economics are dead, because whenever they get a chance to pass tax cuts on the very rich, they still pass them. Whenever they get a chance to cut spending or make it harder for Democrats to spend, they do that. They've never under a Republican cared about the deficit. You go
Sorry,
back in history, they just don't care.
maybe to just be more specific, is that the right wing, the people don't believe in
Yes,
this type of
I would
economics,
agree
like
with
you
that.
said. So
Yeah.
you're saying, 4 in 10 Trump supporters, they want the stimulus bill. You're starting to see them support Republicans who just leave economics at the door. And it is pure culture issues. And it is
Yeah,
pure,
like
it
Mr.
is Second
Potato Head.
Amendment. Yeah, it is pure culture, abortion, and gun rights. The spending, they don't care about anymore.
Well, it's really interesting, right? Because the people that care about those issues, though, are not a winning coalition for them nationally, right? We
They
saw
aren't.
that in the last election, and they are hard committing to it. Like, the more that they do that, in my opinion, the more that they lose the suburban vote, which is what they lost in this last election that cost them the election ultimately.
I
If
think
you,
wine
yeah,
moms cost them the election, quite frankly.
sure. I mean, there's a lot of things
Suburban
that
women.
went into Biden winning, right? Suburban women, but also, I mean, when you look at the maps now, like now that all the votes have been counted and assessed, you see that the area around cities that went Democrat are much larger than they were in 2016. And it's really a question of whether or not Republicans are going to double down on Trumpism, which they clearly are. I don't see them retaking the White House with a message like that.
Did you either of you happen to see the CPAC speech I tuned in for about 5 minutes and I couldn't
I couldn't do it.
take it anymore. So I sort of read a summary,
I did as
and
well.
it was so amazing to me that after the failures of this guy for the past 4 years, that they are doubling down. That Trump's CPAC speech was about we have to build a wall, we have to end the wars, which hey, I'm for, that's fine. But the fact of the matter is he had the chance to do it and he didn't do it. And so they're just getting bamboozled because they say they want someone to fight for them, but they're picking someone who's just so unimpressive and someone who failed them so hard that if they double down on Trumpism, they're never going to get elected nationally again.
I think the Senate races that they're going to have before them are going to be brutal in this upcoming election. I mean, you have traditional Republicans retiring, and you're going to have Trumpian candidates winning those primaries, going up against like the lieutenant governor of Pennsylvania. I forget his name right now, but he is a blue collar working class Democrat who plays perfectly for that state. And if you put him in a general election against someone who is behaving like Trump and saying all those crazy things, you will have them bleed out in the Senate, which is their last real form of control over this government.
Yeah, I just don't understand the strategy. I do follow a lot of right wing media people, and when they talk about how they're approaching this stuff nationally, I mean, if they want to do more economically populist things, I sort of get that, right? Like,
but then who are you caucusing with? You're caucusing with Bernie Sanders, right?
That's what I
your
mean.
ultimate enemy.
Because frankly, the United States, I made this point in another podcast that I was on a few days ago. If anyone wants to check it out, it's on YouTube, The Descent. Go ahead. But what the Republicans didn't have was an answer for people like Bernie Sanders and AOC, who I don't agree with AOC's prescriptions on many things. But what she does get is diagnosing the problem. That when you walk around this country and you see the homelessness, you see people being bankrupted from healthcare costs, you see the opioid epidemic, you see the crumbling infrastructure, to just pretend that everything is okay and what we need is less spending on infrastructure or something, it's just delusional. I mean, people can see it with their eyes that something is wrong here. And I don't agree with AOC or Bernie's prescriptions necessarily, but to just ignore the problem is delusional.
It's not working either, which is great for Democrats and terrible for Republicans.
Yeah.
Ruth,
I mean,
final
Ruth doesn't have this
thought?
problem in Germany. Yeah, final thought. What's the German perspective?
Yeah, that's always the part where I think people who don't have a two-party system like struggle to understand that how can it, like for us, you have to build a coalition, for example. There are more than one party that is the ruling coalition. So it's never the one thing. It's never the one main topic of one party, but it's always a mix and you have to do compromises and stuff. So we're used to not getting like the extremes of everything. So I think that's one lesson that American politics should learn by now, that especially if you want to win the Senate, if you want to get back in the game, you have to see what the other party is doing and then just pick it up and try to, like you said, Matt, you have to give answers and you have to take the topic and see how you can move on and work with it and not just be, like you said, delusional and speak some stuff that doesn't make any sense and will not bring anything further. So yeah, but we will see how it will turn out. And I mean, it's important to see how people will react if everything is passed and everything is going great. So yeah.
Very cool. Very nice. Well, that was our first topic. I know we do want to switch over because all of us here at Tonique, especially on this podcast, we're very interested in international politics specifically.
Oh, we love international politics here.
And one thing that you brought up and put on the docket to talk about, Robert, was the Biden strikes in Syria that happened over the past week or week and a half. And I was wondering if you could just sort of expound on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the last week and a half, like you said, President Biden had his first military operation, military action um, against militant groups backed by Iran in Syria. Um, so this is in response to attacks that killed a U.S. private army contractor and injured several U.S. Soldiers and contractors. Um, so they're retaliatory strikes that the Biden administration justified through both the UN Charter and Article 2 of the Constitution. Significantly, it recently came out that Biden called off a second strike against similar targets because right before it was supposed to happen, they received credible intelligence that women and children were present. There's a lot to talk about here, but I'd love to hear your input as the resident libertarian, Matt, before I give my stance.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to go on here. You know, I think we have to sort of take a step back because just focusing in on this strike in particular, I saw some people making some hot takes on Twitter that this is sort of going to exacerbate the conflict. I think what interests me was when I read that piece that you put in there, um, you sort of have to realize like, so these were strikes. So there's an American army base in Erbil, Iraq, and it was being fired at from an Iranian group in Syria. And so my question is, you know, what the group said, and of course they are probably very bad people, right? I mean, they're just launching rockets at people. But what they said was the American occupation will like basically never sleep. And I just have to wonder, like, at what point is the United States having military bases in Iraq, which is a majority Shiite country? We have credible intelligence due to leaked cables that the parliament of Iraq is basically compromised by
Oh
Iran.
yeah.
Um, it isn't a, you know, there was a talk a long ago when you and I were growing up, or all three of us, that they wanted to bring democracy to Iraq. That is not what is going on right now. As it stands currently, Iraq is owned by Iran. And so when you see that American bases are in Iraq, American bases are basically in enemy territory. And so to
I
just,
mean, yeah, it's there. I just think that we have no business being in Iraq. I don't think we had any business going there in the first place. When you look at what it spawned, right? We have an endless war that has cost billions of dollars, thousands of U.S. lives, and just an untold, often untold humanitarian cost for that entire region. Um, and we're losing. Like we created a new terrorist group by in ISIS. Um, you know, there's just no winning there. I still can see the justification for the war in Afghanistan, even though it was not handled correctly, in my opinion. And that we could have done more nation building, more counterinsurgency that would have been with a more humanitarian approach. But Iraq never really made sense to me, and it still doesn't.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's an international thing, but I know it from German that we have this saying, if you kill one terrorist, there will 10 others will follow. So it's always a question of, yeah, you can strike back, but it's like in an argument, there will always something that comes that's like, it will come back and even hit you harder. So the question is it like, how good was it planned? Like, what is the humanitarian like cost that we have? And also saying like, okay, there were women and children at the place, so we didn't shoot. Okay, yeah, but still, there were still people in the first strike that were hurt, and we don't know who it really was. I mean, yeah, of course, there are the intelligence, but that's not enough. So the question is, of course, I mean, the perfect world would be without war, but what I ask myself is, how can you? I mean, you have to react as the US. Like you're a global player, so you have to act somehow. So like what would you say? What would be the more valid answer for that?
Well, Ruth, I think you hammered on something. It is a good saying that if you kill one terrorist, 10 more will follow. Because a lot of times the news media and the military gets caught up using slang um, to really cover up the reality of what they're doing. So they'll use words like collateral damage. Now, what is collateral
Right.
damage? Collateral damage is
Women and children.
killing women and children. You know, when Barack Obama wanted to start using more drones to launch a drone war, the justification was, well, there's not going to be as many troops on the ground. It's going to be more of a scalpel. Scalpel. It's not a scalpel if you're on the receiving end of a 500-pound bomb, right? Like that's not a surgical strike. Blowing up a building. I mean,
So
yeah, go ahead.
So for me, drone strikes are they're incredibly complicated because when used correctly, they can be a scalpel. You may not feel like that on the receiving end, but if you are a militant or a terrorist organization, there are, threats, incredible threats that make you change how you operate. You can't use technology in the same way. You can't have real communication with each other because it's traceable. It limits your capabilities. My biggest problem with drone strikes is that we don't have clear rules of engagement with them. We do not call off strikes often when collateral damage, which is women and children, or just innocent young men are there. We don't have we didn't under Obama. I doubt we did during Trump. We didn't have.
He increased it.
Okay, so we didn't have guidelines, and
he drops the biggest and the best.
Oh well, Jesus.
That's
when you have the right information, which it sounds like this strike, which was on a weapons smuggling operation and a weapons depot, it sounds like this strike was kind of the best version of it. And you took the extra step of preventing casualties, which is actually, like Ruth was saying, one of the key mechanisms for terrorist recruitment is showing videos of women and children blown up by US strikes. If you can avoid those things, there is a place for drone strikes in the US arsenal, but if you're not willing to do that, then there definitely isn't.
I think when it comes to Iraq and Syria at this point, and the need to sort of draw back is the unfortunate reality that there is no way this ends being clean.
Totally.
I mean, if the United States withdraws, it's going to be ugly. The reality is it's going to be ugly. It's sort of,
well, we saw what withdrawal did
benefits.
in 2014. It spawned a new militant group that was able to take over a large section of Iraq. Like these are
Iraq and Syria, right?
Iraq and Syria.
Interestingly enough, one of their recruitment efforts was stepping over that line, the Sykes-Picot line of Iraq and Syria, planting a flag and saying, fuck you, occupiers. We beat your ass, right? I mean, you're talking. They're using grievances from, I think the Sykes-Picot Treaty was after World War I. I mean, like this is how far it's gone back, and so at some point we need to reorient the entire strategy because we're just continuing down this line. I don't see how it gets better anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that's the point. There's no hope at the end. Like there's no plan how to not fix it, but how to have a somewhat solution. There's always all these strikes are still there momentarily. They're just for one part of the time, and then something new happens. I mean, everything you do will lead to a reaction of the people, and killing people, even especially women and children or innocent people, that will just make the problem worse and just give militant groups the argument to say, yeah, we can fight back. We have the right to defend ourselves, even though we don't have to discuss their ideology. There's still the problem that should be asked, how can the US like act without giving them this argument, without giving them the evidence to react and to get even deeper in this problem.
I think
And I mean
something else.
oh god.
Oh, go ahead.
No, please, Matt.
I was just say I think something else is we have to step back from the entire strategy we're taking towards the region of the Middle East. And so a lot of these operations are for example, Israel. I think Israel is strong enough to defend itself. I mean, I went there 3 years ago. Great place, great people. Um,
Well,
but
not
also
only are they
Saudi
strong enough,
Arabia.
but they're now in a diplomatic position to do so, right? Being
Yeah, they
recognized
are.
by Arab nations in that region.
They are. A lot of the reason we're getting involved in these conflicts isn't necessarily just Israel, they're a smaller part, but it's really Saudi Arabia's Cold War with Iran. This is our commitments to the crown in Saudi Arabia. And you saw how sort of, far we will go recently when the Biden administration said the punishment for Jamal Khashoggi's killing will be that MBS isn't allowed to come to the White House. I mean, come on. I mean, they
Yeah.
sanctioned a few underlings, but let's be real. Who ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi?
I
That
mean,
was MBS. That wasn't
well,
just some random guy in the Saudi state.
yeah. I also think, if we take a step back, like you're suggesting, this region has been relevant in global history to occupiers like the US, like Britain and France before. And, emerging is China as a new form of occupier through their Belt and Road Initiative. This region is relevant because of its oil and previously because of its location for trade routes. Those are two things that no longer, well, the trade routes don't matter anymore because global shipping is by sea or by air, and it's faster and cheaper. Oil is a resource that, while significant, the US is now self-sufficient for military purposes at the very least, if not in totality. And in the future won't be relevant because it can't be, because the world's going to end if it remains this relevant from climate change. So you have a region that is consuming time, resources, effort. It is destroying lives, and it is causing untold human consequences as well. And this is a region that won't be relevant in 50 years. So why are we still there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the people who are making these decisions, it's that thing where you get so involved you can't see the forest for the trees. Where you have these people who are brought up in these schools of thought, their entire employment and their promotion depends on them really focusing on, okay, like, hey, I'm going to become the expert in Yemen and AQAP. And so for some reason, there's Al Qaeda behind every single bush, right? Like this is what justifies everything, is that they're so sucked into the region that it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah, yeah. And also, like, I think you have to, like you said, take a step back and see if you're even, like, is it even okay to be there still in this region after so many years? And what, like, I mean, American soldiers are going there. So it's not just the foreign people, if you talk about that, but it's American and Iranian and Iraqi people. So the question is, like, how can you justify it, and how is it possible to change the narrative also about the topic? That, like you said, Robert, that, like, it's important now, the region, but it will change. So you have to, like, go with the time, and also, just take a step back and not be big brother watching and acting, and just ask yourself if you are even, like, is it valid that you are there? Are you even allowed? I mean, there's no one to control you, but is it allowed to be there? Are these troops like relevant, or is it just because you have some kind of loyalty to someone else, which you should question for sure.
Well, I think that plays a little bit into our third topic, and Robert is writing a piece now based on the justification of using military force by the executive branch, using Article
Yes,
2 of the Constitution. And so, if you could tell us a little bit more about what you're writing and how it's relevant to this.
absolutely. I'd be happy to. So Article 2 of the Constitution grants the quote unquote executive power to the American president. It's never defined. It's not expanded upon. It's debated by constitutional scholars and members of Congress and presidents themselves. However, throughout the centuries that the office of the presidency has existed, every president in the chair has expanded what the executive power can do in some way. Lincoln used it to raise troops to defend the Union in the Civil War, which at the time you have to do, right? You can't wait for Congress to authorize this if you're under attack. However, that's something new that the president can now do. FDR greatly expanded what the office of the president is capable of for regulating the economy. And then also the executive branch has just been rapidly expanding to deal with not only a union of states that's grown from 13 to 50, but also, we're now a global player in a way that I don't think the founding fathers could have ever imagined. They probably could have. They're very smart, but I don't think they spent a lot of time thinking about that.
And they expressly didn't want to be, right?
Yeah, they were very protectionist people. The real point of this is that we basically now have a unitary executive who has as much power as as all the branches of government combined, because through executive order you can make laws, through control over the military you can, like Biden, for example, he did not get congressional authority to do this. That's significant. That is a U.S. president using the U.S. military to do something just at his and his generals' discretion. So my argument in this piece that I'm writing is basically that Congress has reined in presidents before by passing laws, often through bipartisan majority, because it has to clear both chambers twice because presidents veto them. But it's necessary now that we rein in what presidents can do, especially under a president that is responsible, when we've had several irresponsible ones in the past.
Can I also ask, maybe, to just, instead of talk about this in the context of the Middle East, like we have been the past few minutes, what really worries me in the future, again, people always think when their guy's in office, it's fine, but they don't realize that the powers they give them get transferred onto the next. And this was the fear with Donald Trump, right? Like, if you pass a law and you're saying that the president can do something, Donald Trump, luckily,
Can now do that thing.
Yeah, he was like, it's such a shame. I've heard so many like anecdotes of him just not being interested in reading books, and he's not interested in learning anything. He's a very much like, the last person who talks to him is what his opinion is going to be.
He's a genius with a J, man. Like that's really what he is.
What worries me is the Middle East can't really strike back in a very big way against the United States. China and Russia can. And so is it fair that in the future, this path we're going down, because China as a rising power and the United States sort of as a declining power, there is this theory that eventually powers, great powers will fight one another, either to protect themselves, and maintain the top dog, or as to sort of challenge the top dog. And maybe in the 21st century, that's not as possible anymore, just with technology and
it's a new form of combat, right? It's these hacks that you see, this intellectual property theft. It is shutting down economy. It is shutting down power grids. It's doing things that, while you're not putting troops on the ground, while you're not launching ballistic missiles, you are still engaged in warfare of a modern era.
Yeah, I think that's like oh, sorry. Yeah.
No, I was going to ask Ruth actually, like from the German perspective, what is sort of Germany's stance and the EU stance against China? Because in the United States, it's very much, we're number one, and China thinks, they're going to come up and take the spot. But what's the EU's perspective? You guys are, right there.
Well, I think it's for the EU, it's difficult because I mean it's not only one country, it's more. So you have to find a compromise, and they are always struggling to find the direction they want to go because there are countries like Poland and the Ukraine who are like very right-wing nationalism. So they do their own thing. So that's hard to combine. But yeah, I think the problem is, for example, also Germany. Like we have strong relationships to China because of the economical thing. We produce like German factories produce their car parts in China, for example, in Xinjiang, the part where the Uyghurs live. So
I didn't know
well,
that.
I think there is this high rank of the human rights. Like that's one of the basics in the European Union, but also the European Union is not strong enough. We're not sure what we want, so we can't fight China, for example. We can't say, okay, we will be against it. You have to do that. There are always these sanctions. It's the same with Russia, for example. After Alexander Navalny, we said, okay, no, that's not gonna work for us. We have to sanction you, but they sanctioned like some people who have some kind of influence. But still, there are talks. There is stuff going on behind the scenes we don't know about. So I think it's hard to say. I think that's always the problem with the EU. We have to find a step where we are and then see what can we do, how can we fight, or how can we speak out against stuff we don't like without like getting our ass kicked, basically. So yeah.
Well, does Germany still have plans to go forward with the Nord Stream pipeline? That's obviously
Oh,
extremely important um, in terms of like keeping relationship with Russia. How are
yeah.
the people balancing? Obviously there's a lot of stuff coming about Russia recently, right, with Alexei Navalny and stuff like that. But you don't want to jeopardize energy, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's now it's Merkel's like last year. Now in 2021, we will have the election in September. And to be honest, I think the pandemic takes more, takes all over all the media. So there's not a lot about Russia, only like when Alexei Navalny was arrested, then yeah. But so the problem is, well, I think a lot of citizens don't know really about the pipeline, the Nord Stream project, and so they don't speak out. There are no protests or not big protests, so that's one part. And also, I think like Merkel announced that she will go on after Alexei Navalny was arrested, and even like when he was poisoned, she still said that's nothing to discuss about because yeah, it's hard. We need the pipeline in some way, but also we will be so influenced by Russia. We will have to, like, there's nothing we can do without like this project is important for us. I would say even more than for Russia. So yeah,
Interesting.
we will. Yeah.
Well,
What
it's
do you
always
want to
interesting
say?
when an authoritarian state is exporting a good that the democratic states need, right? Because
Yeah.
suddenly everything is fine, and it's all the human rights violations. It's they don't see them
Yeah.
anymore.
And also, like, people say that they will go forward and say they will speak out against, but I mean, we saw the relations between Russia, I mean, especially Putin and Merkel were, and they talked a lot, and they had their discussions, but still, I think there has to be more. And yeah, we need to have this pipeline and this project that's important for us, but you have to always see how can you justify it, how can you explain to people later, oh, we have this project, but we like sell our parts to Russia. So yeah.
I also wonder, and I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, um, is is having this economic relationship with Russia and sort of approaching their human rights abuses maybe from the perspective of, hey, we're an ally, let's talk a little bit more about this and sort of have more give and take rather than a like more standoffish screw you, because if you're gonna do that, the odds of them changing their mind, I wonder, is less, right?
I
Whereas
mean,
if you
I
are close with someone, does it sort of give you more political capital
Mm,
to push them in a certain
yeah,
direction, in a better direction? I'm just wondering.
I mean, that's always the hope. You always hope to get to a point where you agree without having to fight or to scream. But the problem is with giving in such projects, you you push them, you give them the sign that it's okay or that they will find a way to get through it. So yeah, I mean if we accept the project, we continue to do it, there has to be clear lines. There has to be a dialogue and a discussion about what happened and how it can be that Navalny is in like prison for 30 days, like what's going on. So I think it's okay to have. I mean, you need the relations. You can't just say okay, stop, because then like where would we get our stuff from? We need international allies. So yeah, somehow we have to talk to the bad guy in this way, and I think there will always be a bad guy. And also, like, as you see, the US is not the perfect ally itself. So, yeah, I think it's what you said, Matt. You have to find a way to take your stand on the human rights violations and say what's going on, with also keeping in mind what you need for your own country and how you can justify it. Yeah.
I
But
don't
it's
think,
complicated as always.
yeah,
Of course.
I don't think that anyone has ever really changed, um, a regime by having close closer ties. Like I think whatever Putin wants to do in that country, he is going to do. Um, I will say though, the export of soft power might be a more convincing argument to me, at least, where you have culture and ideas and thoughts that, because you are allied, they make it into that society, and that can lead to positive change.
That's
But I
more I'm
don't know.
thinking.
Yeah, I just don't know. I mean, you can think of hard sanctions working in several cases, in my opinion, anyway. The most prominent of which being the Iran deal, the Iran nuclear deal, which had a horrible humanitarian cost. However, it did stop them from pursuing nuclear weapons in a convincing way until Trump blew it up. Um, but that's still an example. If we had competent foreign policy under Trump, that we would have remained in that deal. But I
Yeah, I
don't.
think
It's yeah. Go
soft
ahead.
power. Yeah, I think soft power really just is underappreciated for how
I agree.
much it. I mean, none of us were alive for the Cold War, right? But eventually, what ended up destroying the Soviet Union was a mix of having them overreach their empire and sort of, go into places like Afghanistan, and they couldn't economically support fighting on so many fronts, even if they were covert wars. But also people, because you sort of, Radio Free Europe, right? Like, I
Yeah.
mean, that was a real thing that worked, that people in those Soviet states were dreaming about going to the West and going to America. People in East Berlin, they wanted to flee. There was a bunch of people in East Berlin that were dying to get over to West Berlin
Yeah,
just
I don't
because
know
of
how
the
you'd
soft power.
split a city in the middle, right? And then
Oh,
expect information to not flow in some way. Um, that's just crazy to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I just get worried because another way is I wonder if that's going to work for China. Like it doesn't seem that it is. China's its own
Well,
beast. I mean, as we see now, the NBA can't exert any cultural, take any real stand. Um, other than just having their product in China, right? I
Well,
mean, as soon as they try to take a stand,
China
they
is its
fall.
own beast, right? One of the most effective tools that we have actually is students that come over here for our education system and experience Western culture and experience democracy and know what is going on in the rest of the world in an unfettered way because they have free access to the internet. And then they go back ready to be put into a higher position in either the Communist Party or some state-backed business because they've been educated in America. That's an example of soft power that I think really works.
I mean, I guess does it work? Is it working? Because
Well, it's got to be a slow play, right? Like you can't. I
right,
mean, soft power
Yeah.
is something that
it's
creeps
so
in
yeah,
over decades. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
yeah.
And I
China
mean,
really scares me.
it's yeah, it's nice to have this culture like exchange, but the question is, if they go back, will they use their information? Will they take what they learned, what they saw, and build their own opinion, and then also speak up against the system that's currently working? Like, I think that if you look at the Chinese system with the party, with the CCP, that's like nearly impossible to express your Western standards and your Western ideas without getting like kicked out.
And
Very
also,
true.
let's be frank about this. Like, if you're a Han Chinese person that is educated, to them, their system is better.
Oh
They
yeah.
they see they
I
see the
mean,
West, and they see
that's
liberalism,
kind of
quite
a
frankly. I mean, I'm saying they're
Well,
raised in it,
that's
probably
kind
not.
of a really
right?
large generalization to make about several
I think,
100 million
yeah.
people.
I mean, well, to
Not.
them, what they've seen over the past 40 years is they've maintained this communist flavor culture government while
Communist
implementing
capitalism.
capitalism. They've seen hundreds of millions of people be pulled out of poverty, and in their system, they're seeing sort of a crumbling of the liberal order in the West. I mean, the past 30
Okay,
years has
well
not been very
then,
good for our side, I will say. I mean,
yeah,
I just don't
that's
see,
probably true.
there's a
Well,
lot of
let me pose a hypothetical to you then. What happens when the inevitable trend of their population reverses and it starts to decline? Like what happens? There are some figures that's from China that say their population is going to be cut in half by 2050. No, that can't be right. In 60 years, so 2075. So what do you do then? Like how do you justify that, the Communist Party did right by us when there are just not enough people?
man, I don't know. I would have to take a look at sort of what that study's counting on.
I'll
Obviously, they
send it
had,
in.
yeah, please send it.
It's
Like
an
honestly,
interesting one.
because they had the one child policy, but I don't think they're really adhering to that as much anymore, right?
No,
I mean,
definitely
they
not.
sort of
The figures definitely range and it depends on who you ask, but they are set to lose a significant portion of the population and they haven't pulled enough of their population out of the poverty line
Oh,
to make a meaningful difference. Because when you look at GDP per capita, for example, you have a huge discrepancy between that and other developed nations, and most of those developed nations experience population decline after their GDP per capita had expanded significantly. So every nation has incredible problems mounting before them, and for the future, and
well,
we'll have to see.
I will say one devil's advocate thing
Sure,
here is that
that's your thing, right?
one, of course, you're going to be hearing that a lot, but one thing that China does have on their side that we as liberal democracies do not have is the ability for long-term planning. And so
oh
they
yeah.
will take these civilizational questions and challenges and really try to have a roadmap of where they want to be in 50, 60 years. The nature of our electoral system, you know, when someone gets elected to president, usually after 1 year, their job becomes campaigning again, right? Senators, they get in, and the next thing they're doing is sending fundraising emails to me saying, send me $5 because Mr. Potato Head is the end of Western culture, right? Like This
Oh,
sort of
you get those ones?
ridiculousness. Someone signed me up for my friend Bobby, I think, signed me up for a Republican one, and the emails are so insane. I haven't unsubscribed because they're actually hilarious. But that was one of them. It was like, Mr. Potato Head, is this the end? Dr. Seuss, is this the end? I'm like, oh my God. But China can plan for this population, right? I mean, a lot of Chinese foreign policy is, if we don't like the president, we just won't engage with them for 4 years because we know that you guys are going to have a new one with a completely
Yeah.
different, um, you know, different ideas or different ideology in a few years. So I don't know.
I just
I
I
think it's
just
really
looked
hard to
it up
tell.
so that I'm not providing any false statistics. This is from Forbes. China's population is set to drop by half by 2100, so 80 years,
Okay.
which is
Oh,
significant. I mean, there's time to plan for that, but that's a problem.
That's a big problem. Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I
Well,
guess we'll have to try
I
to
think that's
solve these
time.
issues on, yeah, we'll have to try to solve these issues on our next episode. Um, Thanks everyone for
Sounds
tuning
good.
in. If for all of these great articles, Ruth, you have an article coming out soon?
yes. Yeah, I'm gonna write about the Green New Deal of US and the Green Deal of the European Union and how to compare it and how it's going.
Awesome.
Yes.
Looking forward to it. Make sure to check that out when it comes out. Robert, give a little plug for your article on the.
Absolutely. So, stroke of the pen, law of the land op-ed about constitutional power of U.S. presidents. That's online now. Would love it if you check it out and leave a comment what you think.
Great. And me, I'm sure I'll get back to writing something that you'll find on the website soon enough. I have one in the tank, but I don't want to make any promises on this episode. So make sure you tune in next week. This is something we're releasing every single week. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you, Robert. My name is
Thank
Matt
you.
Spurrier. Thank you guys for tuning into Tonique's Politics Refresh. Talk to you next time.